Alright guys, the first question you guys asked for is number 2. And it says to solve each equation. So I'm going to take the 2 on the outside and do what with it? Good, distribute that. And I get negative 16n minus 4 plus 8n equals, distribute this negative 2, negative 12n minus 4. Alright, when I'm solving, I need to get all my variables to one side and all my constants to the other side. So I have a negative 16n and an 8n here. And if I add the 12n over, I'm going to get, let's see, negative 16 and positive 8 is a negative 8. Plus 12 is going to give me a 4n. I haven't done anything with this yet, so I'm going to bring that down. Now, to move my constant over, I'm going to add 4. I'm going to do the inverse. And I get 4n equals 0. So if I divide by 4, I get n equals 0. Okay. All right, the next one is number 4. And for number 4, it's an absolute value. So if the absolute value is by itself, I know I have to split this up to be 8m minus 1 equals positive 47. And 8m minus 1 equals, what is it? Good, negative 47. So if I solve both of these, I add 1, 8m equals 48, divide by 8, m equals 6. Since this is multiple choice, this is gone and this is gone. Let's see what else we get. I add 1. 8m equals negative 46. Divide by 8. So m equals negative 23 over 4. Okay. All right, let's see what the next question is. All right, so 6. I did do this in the other video, but I'm going to go ahead and explain what I did. First, I read the directions, because that tells me a lot. It actually says solve each equation by taking square roots. And in order to take the square root, you have to isolate the thing that's squared. And in number 6, that's b. So in order to get b squared by itself, I'm going to subtract 1 like I did here. So I subtracted 1 to both sides. Positive 1 and negative 1 make 0. Then I divided by 5 to both sides. And I got b squared equals 20. Once you get the thing that's squared by itself, what can I do? Square root it. So I take the square root. Now, what's going to mess you guys up the most is you guys are probably going to forget this plus or minus thing. Right? Do not forget that when you take the square root, you have both the positive and the negative. So you've got to do that plus or minus. And then I broke down 20 to be 4 and 5. So 2's are squared in there. So I took out the 2. And 5 was what was left inside. Okay. All right, so it looks like the next one's 8, and the directions say to simplify. What operation is this asking me to do with these binomials? What do I need to do? Right in between here, do you see an addition or a subtraction?
No.
No. So what does that mean I'm doing? Good. I'm going to multiply, which means I'm going to distribute this. So a negative 1 times a negative 8. A negative times a negative?
Oh, positive.
Positive 8. Ooh, I almost messed up. A negative 1 and a negative 2i gives me a positive 2i. 5i times negative 8 is negative 40i. 5i times negative 2 is going to be a negative 10i squared. So if I simplify this, I'm going to get 8 minus 38i minus 10i squared. Now, if this was the final exam, one of your answer choices would look like this. Because the directions say to simplify completely, you got to simplify completely. How many of you guys remember what's special about an I squared? What is it? Good, it equals a negative 1. So I have 8 minus 38i minus 10 times a negative 1. I squared equals negative 1. So a negative times a negative is a positive. And I get 18 minus 38i. So my answer is B. All right, number 10. Number 10 says to solve by factoring. When we factor, no matter what we're factoring, what's the first step? Okay, it has to equal 0, especially if you're solving by factoring. That's true. But when we factor, what's our first step? When we're ready to factor, we got to look for what's in common. So what does 4x squared plus 10x plus 4 have in common? A 2. So if I divide out that 2, I factor out that 2, I get 2x squared plus 5x plus 2. Now I'm going to factor this trinomial and say, what multiplies to 2x squared? 2x and x. What multiplies to 2? 1 and 2. Can I put a 2 with the 2x?
No.
No. So I put a 1 here and a 2 here. And I have to check what my signs need to be. 1x and 4x. How do those add? These have to add to give me a 5x. Good. They both have to be positive. Now, if all this said was to factor completely, this is what my answer would be. Do any of my answers match that? No, because it says to solve. So I take each of my factors and I set them equal to 0. Well, 2 does not equal 0. So I'm not looking at that one. I'm looking at the ones with the x's. I'm solving for x. And I set these equal to 0. Subtract 1. 2x equals negative 1. Divide by 2. And x equals negative 1/2. Now, the beauty of multiple choice, I've eliminated A and I've eliminated B. Subtract 2 and I get x equals negative 2. So my answer choice is, well, that's not negative 2, so it's not that. D. All right, when I did number 12 in first period, I used up all this space, basically. So I'm going to go ahead and do 11, but I got to delete all this first. All right, it says solve with the quadratic formula. So what's the quadratic formula? Good. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. In order to use that, what do I got to do? Good. Find out what a, b, and c are. In order to find what a, b, and c are, I've got to make sure that I'm set equal to 0. Am I set equal to 0? Yes. So I can go ahead and identify my a, b, and c. What's my a? Good. A is the number in front of my squared term, so that's a 2. B is the number in front of my x term, or in this case n, so that's 1. And c is my constant, so I've got negative 21. Okay, let's plug this into the formula. I always rewrite my formula with parentheses. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, I'm plugging in b, like I'm looking at my formula, negative b. So b goes here, b squared goes here, a goes here, and c goes here. Alright, simplifying this, I get a negative 1 plus or minus, what's 1 squared? 1. And then I have a negative 4 times a 2, which is negative 8, times a negative 21, which would be a positive what? What was that, 168? Good. And on bottom I have 2 times 2, which is 4. So negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 169. You guys know what the square root of 169 is? I have 168 plus 1, so I get 169. 13. Good, it is 13. Square root of 169 is 13. So, a negative 1 plus 13, negative 1 plus 13 gives me 12 over 4. And a negative 1 minus 13 gives me a negative 14 over 4. Now, if I look at my answer choices, I go, well, those are my answers. Okay, well, we can simplify. What's 12 divided by 4? 3. The only one with 3 is A. We could have simplified a little bit more for this one and said negative 7 over 2. And that's how we got A. Alright, so I posted one video already where I left off at this part of the question, so I'm going to go ahead and pick up here. So I have equation 4, which is negative 13r plus 6t equals negative 7, and equation 5, which is negative 15r plus 21t equals 6. So neither of these look easy to eliminate something, so I'm just going to stick with r in this case. And I'm going to multiply the top equation, equation 4, by 15, which means I need to multiply equation 5 by a negative 13. And that way, if I do this, I'm going to get a positive 15 times 13, and a negative 15 times 13, and a positive 15 times 13. So let's see what that gives us. What's 15 times negative 13? Negative 195. Okay, and then 15 times 6 is what? 90t. And negative 7 times 15 is? Negative 105? Okay. Now for this bottom one, I get a positive 195r. And I get a negative, what's 21 times 13? 273t. Negative 13 times 6? 78. Negative 78. So r's will go ahead and eliminate. T's will give me a negative 183t. And this will